Hi, this is Paolo. Welcome to an introduction of the important terroirs in Puerh. So what you're seeing is all of Yunnan, and Puerh is produced all over there and also in Laos and Myanmar. But the three most important regions are Linchang, Simao, also used to be called Puerh Prefecture, and Shishobanna or Banna. So starting from the top. Oh, but before this, usually the tea made in other regions is not done as single terroir, and it's usually blended into like low quality show puer cakes, for instance. And one of the things that happens a lot, the more far away you go from Shishabana, is that you have much more wild varietals tree. So up here in all this region. And some of these trees can be really, really old. We have some from trees that are definitely 1,000-year-old, but they're not that good because they're very, very far away from standard puer. There is standard puer as well, but usually it's not made a single terroir. It's not the highest quality. The three most significant are, again, Linchang, Simao, and Panna. This big river here is the Mekong River or the Lanchang River. It goes down all the way. So starting from the north, in Linchang, you have like very famous places like Pingdao and Shigui, and which are very, very, very renommated, and they got a specific character. But besides that, Linchang is pretty wide. There's a lot of tea around there, and the general characteristic is high floral fragrance, generally. A lot of this tea can be very, very high elevation. You can find trees that are really, really old. And in some places, like for example, Bangdong, and again, as I said, Bindao and Shigoi, as I was mentioning before, and Nahan, you find some pockets of excellence. But generally speaking, there is a lot of tea in there, and a lot of it can be very, very old trees, but it doesn't have the same thickness really. Kind of the creamy texture that you find the more south you go. So going more south, this very big prefecture here is Simao, this one. And the most important bits are possibly these two, like Kunlusan and Midi are two Qing Dynasty tribute areas. So it's where the emperors were be given tea. Midi is actually genuinely so. Kunlusan, maybe not. Midi has very, very big gaogan, so single pole tall tree is very, very high. And it's generally can be very, very good tea. And other than that, you have other places like Bangwai, which is on the edges. You have Jingmai, which is on the edge of is very near Menghai, and arguably tastes a bit more like Menghai. So generally speaking, this is halfway in terms of taste profile between Linchang and Banna. So if Linchang is very floral, high fragrance, relatively sweet, but not a lot of texture, while down in Banna you have like very texture heavy teas, but not as floral, not as aromatic. So here in Simao you have something halfway between the two. Again, there is a lot of tea made in there, and not all of it is made a single terroir. All over there are wild varietals, tea trees as well, and again both Linchang and Simao have quite a lot, but so does Banna. So going down to Banna, now Banna is really the most interesting part. So on the left of the river, you have the Menghai area. Of course, the most famous place is Lao Banjan. Well, Banjan in particular, and Lao Banjan down here. The second topmost terroir in Menghai is probably Xinyutang or Rhinoceros Pond. Here on the left, you have Myanmar. Now, the good thing about Myanmar is that actually, Myanmar, this particular bit, obviously Myanmar goes on and kind of tea is made in a lot of other places, but the ones that are made near the border are not bad. In fact, maybe the most popular Lao Banjan brand actually sells Gushu Myanmar as opposed to Lao Banjan. They sell Myanmar as Lao Banjan. And it's got a quite convincing taste. So the taste of Menghai is, as you might know, is strong, powerful, bitter. In the best cases, like Lao Banjan and Xinyutang, it's got huigan that turns the bitter into sweet. But in a lot of the rest of the terroir, it's really just quite bitter and strong. So much more so than on the right side in Ivo. So Menghai Tea Factory, the most famous tea factory, was using for the recipes, they were using blends of everywhere in Menghai. They age very well. So even though they start quite bitter, this bitterness turns into sweetness with time. So some of the more famous cakes like 7542, 7532, 8582, they're all made from Menghai plantation. And, you know, they get a very like thick, rich kind of taste. It can be very charming. On the right of the river, you have the 6 famous tea mountains. So starting from the left, you're going to have Yiwu. Then you have Manjuan, which tastes pretty similar to Yiwu. It's a little bit more different kind of sweetness. You got Ibang at the top. Ibang often has small leaf varietal. So it's, again, another very different type of sweetness. Very, very charming. Very good Ibang. It's very hard to find. And then you also have Gedang and Mangze, which are a little bit more bitter and powerful. And then finally, you also have Yule. So Yule is a little bit more woody and different from the other 6 famous tea mountain. So zooming in, again, let's start from the north. Juliamen is actually a little bit more this way, but it's actually more here. But Juliamen is notable because it's also small leaf tea. And even though it's small leaf, it's really, really thick. On the very north of Yiwu, you have Tianmensan. Actually, the best Tianmensan comes from Laos, and really it's correct to call this whole area Tianmensan. They don't have other names. The traditional Yiwu place is more like here, and this is Yiwu is really the core of Puerh. And you got famous names like, you know, like Feng Wenwo, where we do Feng Wenwo and Bohetang, like in the middle of it's called the Yiwu Goyolin. So Goyolin means state protected forest. Actually, there are state protected forests kind of everywhere around Banna and even in other places. But the most, when one says Goyolin, one usually means this Yiwu Goyolin. Guafensai has been one of the earliest Yiwus. It's just on the border to Laos, or Windy Village in English. Very stereotypical Yiwu, sweet, thick, rich, creamy texture, strong chi. The whole area here, it's called Wangong, is again where I think Wenwo and Bohetang are. And then you find places like Baihuatan at the bottom. And in general, this area is really, really sought after. And the teas from before the 1950s, the Hao, Jicha, they all came from this 6 famous tea mountains area, and particularly from Yiwu. And they've aged amazingly, so much better than the communist era teas from after. Now on the right, you have Laos. Actually, a lot of Laos tea is really, really good, particularly the one that is very close to Yiwu. The problem is that just like Myanmar tea, often if you find Laos tea in the wild, it's not been processed well. So usually it's kind of forgettable. Also Laos, of course, it's much bigger. But the area that's just near Yiwu, we made a tea this year that's just on the other side of Bohetang. It's really, really good. It's much less overpicked than the Yiwu side, because the Yiwu side is like, you know, is a good 10, 15 years that people really want this kind of tea a lot. While on the Laos side, some of these teas are still, they can be massive, standard varietal trees and picked only once a year, so they can be really good. So this is Phong Sali province, and then you have other provinces. Phong Sali province is, you know, of course, is closer to Yiwu. Chuan Quang province, also some pretty decent tea comes from there. Yeah, so this was a very short introduction to the whole. What points do I still want to make? Well, okay, the Yiwu taste. So, okay, let's recap. The northern you go, the more floral, sweet, and less thick. The southern you go, generally the more thicker, more suitable to aging, and more satisfying, deeper, more comfortable energy as well. And in particular, you have the Menghai side and the 6 famous tea mountains and Yiwu side, which are quite different. Yiwu is like, yeah, stereotypically it's called to be like very sweet, but actually some of those teas, like particularly in the Tianmensan, for instance, they got the best of Yiwu and the best of Menghai. They got both the strength of Menghai and the sweetness of Yiwu. On the Myanmar side, you can find decent tea, rarely, but usually it's sold as if it was Banjang. On the Laos side, you can find very, very good teas as well. Rarely, it's possible. And yeah, they tend to be a very stereotypical, when I say stereotypical Yiwu, I mean the more sweet. And Again, floral in some way, but kind of sweet and creamy texture and very, very gentle and easy tea. And then you have the rest of the other 6 famous tea mountains, which start to have slightly different characters. Okay, this was a good introduction, and I'll see you again for other videos on the specific places.